Perhaps you have heard this old saying, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it is yours, and if it doesn't, it never was. Apparently, someone was not satisfied with that complete phrase, and so they added the following. But if it just sits in your living room, messes up your stuff, eats your food, takes your money, and doesn't appear to realize it has been set free, you either married it or gave birth to it. Family, the way that God designed it, is a beautiful thing. But over the course of this month, if we have been reminded of anything, I think we have been reminded that family doesn't always work out the way God intended. Family can be a mess. Family can be dysfunctional. And even as we've looked in Scripture, we've seen that family can be downright mean. When we looked in Genesis chapter 4 several weeks ago and we looked at that, we were reminded that family is mean. Cain became so filled with anger that he ended up taking his brother and taking his life. We were reminded last week of how the problems in a family can continue generation after generation. That Abraham was deceitful. His son Isaac was deceitful. And then his twin sons, Jacob and Esau, the word Jacob even means he deceives. He deceived his brother Esau twice, and we know that for several decades that ended up being a strained family relationship. Relationship lost because of deception and because it was unresolved conflict. Today, though, we turn to Scripture to see what I fear may be the most difficult story. I knew that when I chose this topic last month and I put this on the schedule of sermons in the newsletter, I knew that this would be a sermon that had to be handled with kid gloves. And so this morning as we open Scripture, I'm going to ask you to turn to that Scripture. I'm going to ask you to read along in that Scripture. And there are verses that I will not read that I will ask you to read because we do have still some children in our auditorium. But it will be an opportunity for us to have that discussion later with children in our family of just how problems in a family can lead to devastation and why it's important for us to be a family that loves one another. This morning we are turning to 2 Samuel, but before we get to 2 Samuel, I'd like for us to stop at 1 Chronicles chapter 3. Normally when we get in this section of Chronicles, I grow weary. If there's a chance of me falling asleep reading Scripture, it is in 1 Chronicles within those first 9 chapters, because I am not one of those guys that likes genealogy. And for me to stand before you this morning and to try to read 9 verses of names is going to be challenge in itself. But I do think it is important because this morning our focus of our study deals with David and his family. It is important to note at this point that we are not dealing with young David, the David who picked up the 5 smooth stones, only used one, and slayed the giant Goliath. At this point, we are dealing with the adult David, King David. We are dealing with the David at this point that he is growing his own family. But I will suggest to you early and often today that David had a most dysfunctional family. Let's work our way slowly, patiently through the names of these first 9 verses. These were the sons of David born to him in Hebron. The firstborn was Amnon, the son of Hananoam of Jezreel. The second, Daniel, son of Abigail of Carmel. The third, Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephaniah, son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithrion, by his wife Eglah. These 6 were born to David in Hebron, where he reigned 7 years and 6 months. David reigned in Jerusalem 33 years, and these were the children born to him there: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. These 4 were born by Bathsheba, daughter of Amiel. There were also Ibhar, Elishua, Eliphelet, Nogah, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Ephelet, 9 in all. All these were sons of David besides his son by his concubines, and Tamar was their sister. Now, I probably mispronounced a lot of those names, but the 3 that I need us to remember today, I got right. I need us to remember the name Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar. There were 19 boys and 1 girl listed, 19 sons and 1 daughter listed. Mind you, we understand that there were others that were part of David's family. These are the ones that are listed. And we have to understand, we have to gather quickly the importance of Tamar being listed in that genealogy. Her story is extremely important to the course of events that takes place in our study today. For that, we turn back to 2 Samuel chapter 13, where we begin our story. I told you we're remembering 3 names. We are remembering Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar. Now, even within those 3, we know that Amnon had 1 mother, and we know that Absalom and Tamar had another. We know that because of the phraseology that is used in our story in 2 Samuel chapter 13. And so as we go through this was an awkward course of events. We need to understand also as we begin in this chapter 13 verse 1 simply begins with this phrase: in the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Now, that sounds awkward. It should sound awkward, and it should sound like it's not right. Because what we will do is we will go through this passage and we will realize that it's not right. Multiple terms and phrases that are used to let us know just how wicked thing this was, both in the eyes of Israel, but primarily in the eyes of God. And so as we look at that, we know that Amnon had a plan, a plot, and he wanted to lure Tamar to him. And we know that Amnon took advantage of Tamar. He assaulted her. Today that would be deemed as a crime, and he would be arrested, and punishment would be passed along. As we recognize those course of events that took place, what I'd like to give attention to is the reaction of various people involved in this story. Let's look, we're in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 12. This is Tamar speaking to Amnon. "Don't, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing." And so it is described, even in chapter 13, verse 12, as a wicked thing. If we look in verse 15, after the event took place, "Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her. Amnon said to her, 'Get up and get out.'" So he has done this wicked thing, but now this love, this wicked love, this sinful love, what led him to this evil thing, has now turned to hatred. And he basically throws her out of the house. And we continue looking. We turn to verse 19. "Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe that she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away. weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, and she lived a desolate woman. King David reacted to this news in chapter 13, verse 21. When King David heard all this, he was furious. And so we've seen all of these reactions up to this point. Amnon, what he did was a wicked thing. He disgraced Tamar. Amnon became a wicked fool in Israel. Scripture will tell us that. But afterward it tells us that Amnon hated Tamar. We know that Tamar lived as a desolate woman and that King David was furious. But Absalom never said a word to Amnon, neither good nor bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. That is going to be a key phrase for her as we look at what happens. The passage that Alan read for us this morning is important that we recognize this. Chapter 13, verse 23. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep herders were at Baal-Hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. Absalom went to the king and said, "Your servant has had shearers come. Will the king and his officials please join me?" "No, my son," the king said. "All of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you." Although Absalom urged, he still refused to go, but gave his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us." The king asked him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged, so he sent with him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. Amnon ordered his men, "Listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Have not I given you this order? Be strong and brave." So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled. Now there was a report that came to King David that Absalom had struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left. But what we find out in verse 32, this is a critical passage as well. But Jonadab, son of Shimei, David's brother, said, "My Lord should not think that they killed all the princes. Only Amnon is dead." This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar. And so what we find out at that point is that this was a plot that had been 2 years in the making. When Scripture tells us that Absalom hated Amnon, we need to understand that there was a seed planted that began to plot, that began to grow, and it led him to a point of revenge. And the revenge that took place would only be satisfied with Absalom when Amnon was dead. And so that plan was executed. If you keep reading where we left off, what does it say that Absalom did? He killed Amnon and then he fled. He fled. He ran away. And he was gone for a number of years. What is it that Scripture tells us? It tells us that he plotted this for 2 years. He spent 3 years in hiding. When he finally returned to Jerusalem, I'm fast forwarding quickly now because I need us to get to the point of understanding this aspect of the story. He was 3 years in hiding. When he came back to Jerusalem, he was there for 2 years. But then he finally approached his father, King David. They were able to meet. But then we know that Absalom went and he began to go around the countryside. I want to stop for just a second. Because at this point, we need to begin to ask a question. If we were gathered around the table this morning, stopping where we are, and just to simply ask, now whose fault was this? it would be interesting and opinions could fly. But I want us to recognize the rest of the story first. Absalom went around the country. And as he went around the countryside, you will notice, if you continue reading this, that he was elevating himself, but he was making sly comments against his father. He was elevating himself to put himself in a place to be in charge, to be in rule of the land, to be king. And at that point, as he increased in power, what did David do? Did David fight back? Was David this man of courage? Was he the same one that had picked up the stones and threw and hit Goliath? I'm going to suggest to you, no, he wasn't. He was a coward at this point. He cowered down. And remember, there's a point even in the story where he escapes the palace and he goes off and he's going off in this land, and people even along the road, they're mocking him. You don't look like a king. You're not acting like a king. Absalom, now he looks like a king and he acts like a king, but you're not. David, though, did have one true plan left up his royal sleeve. And that plan was executed, and there were some people that were put in the inner circle with Absalom that confused, that caused turmoil among his plans. And we know that Joab was a soldier that was in charge, and as they met up with each other, that the plan was put in place, and we know that there was a point where Absalom was killed, where it was Joab that was in charge of executing that plan of where Absalom, that the way to deal with the threat that he was presenting to the country was for his life to be taken. Now, there's an interesting story even that takes place after that. Because what was David's reaction to that? Absalom, oh Absalom, if it had just been me. If it had just been me. Now, I told you all of that because we've still got a conversation going over here. Whose fault was it? All of this course of events, whose fault was it? Can I say, first of all, whose fault it wasn't? It was not Tamar's fault. She had nothing to do with it. That was not her fault. And we need to understand that, church, because there are a lot of social implications even to that story to today. It was not her fault. Amnon, was it his fault? He certainly had his share of the blame to take for that, didn't he? What he did was wrong. What he did was wicked. What he did was disgraceful. There is a long list of words that were used to describe what he did. And it was evil in the sight of the country, and it was evil in the sight of God. All right, well, let's stop for just a second because there may be more. We've talked about Tamar, not her fault. Amnon definitely has his share of the fault. What about David? What about King David? What about this courageous King David, who was the one who slew the giant? That here, what was it? Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands. But even in his own home, David was not able to deal with the conflict and restore order. There could be a great sermon had today over David's failure to take leadership in his own family. What about Absalom? I have to tell you, church, if in the course of events of what we've been studying this month, that when you deal with anger, with hatred, and with a plot and a plan for revenge, have you noticed this? It never leads to anything good. Now here's the thing. Even if it had not been acted out, what Jesus would remind us in the New Testament is even the hatred that is hidden in our hearts is a sign of spiritual deterioration. It is a sign of spiritual turmoil. We have allowed Satan to have a room in our heart. And I'll tell you this, Satan is never satisfied with a room. He wants the entire house. And when we let him in, we need to understand he wants more territory. And what happened in Absalom's case is this plot for revenge gave birth to another plot and another. it just continued to grow. And in the end of this, look at the struggle within the family. Tamar continued to live as a desolate woman. Amnon lost his life. Absalom lost his life. The entire family was just in absolute turmoil and shambles. So whose fault was it? Man, I don't know. I know it wasn't Tamar's. But I know in the rest of the course of that, there were so many in that family that could have done the right thing but chose the wrong thing. And as a result of that, there was plenty of blame to go around. And there was so much hurt and conflict in that family. So I have to tell you, when I read that story, you know what I've learned? I've learned how not to deal with something. I've learned how not to deal with problems in my family. I've learned that acting on evil thoughts is not the answer. I've learned that revenge is not the answer. I've learned that doing nothing is not the answer. So what can we do? Now for that, I'd like to turn to a modern day story and share that story with you as we close today. The story is told, it's a man by the name of Jim Shaughnessy. And Jim was a great high school football player in the state of Pennsylvania. He played college ball at Arizona State. He was drafted by the New England Patriots. He was a great football player. And the quote that is used to describe him is that he played smash mouth football. Jim, this is the guy that he'd want to put you in the ground, keep you in the ground, and he did not want you to get back up. That was the way that he played. He was intense in everything he did when he stepped onto the football field. And so there was a point one day when someone asked him, what is the key of your success? How is it that you are able to play with such intensity? And I have to tell you this, the individual that asked him the question was not prepared for the answer. Because Jim said, the reason that I play with this level of intensity is because of my father. Because my father was a mean and an angry man. And many were the days in our house when he would come home and he would splatter the walls of the kitchen with my blood because he beat me. And then he would turn around and he'd beat my brother right in front of me, or my mother, right in front of me. He said, that's how I grew up. He said, there was even a day and a time when I would go and I would hide. I had this special hiding spot, and my father didn't know anything about it, but the day he did, he kicked me black and blue. And it was one of the hardest days of my life. And the reason that he played smash mouth football was because of the intensity and the hatred that he had seen in his father and that was carried out in his life. Now, all of that changed his junior year in college. And that was when he came to know Jesus Christ. He became a Christian. And he met a counselor by the name of Gary Smalley. Now, some of us are going to recognize that name because Gary has written some incredible work that deals with how to have good and right relationships. And so Gary met with Jim and he encouraged him to do something. He said, I want you to go to your father and I want you to be reconciled with your father. Jim stopped. He said, no way. That's not about to happen. There is no way I'm going to go to my father and do that. Gary kept pushing and he asked this question. He said, Jim, how much of that broken relationship with your dad is your fault? Jim thought about that for a minute. He said 3% at the most. The other 97% is my dad's fault. Church, listen carefully to what Gary Smalley told him next. He said, Jim, as a follower of Christ, take 100% responsibility for your 3%. Take 100% responsibility for your 3%. Now that struck a chord with Jim. And so he went home. By this point, his father's beginning to age. He asked his dad to step outside in the backyard. And when they stepped outside, he said, Dad, I need to apologize. And he went into detail of the things for which he was apologizing, and the part that as a son that he felt like he had let his family and let his father down. And his father began to ridicule him and to laugh at him. And so Jim bowed his head, but he began to pray out loud. He said, God, my Father, I just ask that someday my dad can know you as his father as you have allowed me to know you. God, my Father, I ask that someday my dad will know you as his father as you have allowed me to know you. He continued to pray, and then as he lifted his head, he looked up, and there his grown father, this mean, bitter, mean-spirited man, he looked up, and Father had tears rolling down his face. And it was at that point that through his tears that Jim's father began to pray. God, someday will you let me know you the way Jim does? God, someday will you let me know you the way my son knows you? The two began to talk. The gospel was shared. And Jim's father became a Christian. And it was for some 14 years after that that his father lived, had a fairly reasonable, good quality of life. Jim and his father were able to go. They were able to go around the country to visit places where they had not been before. Able, father, if you will, to check off some items off his bucket list. But when his father died at peace, and his father died knowing Jesus. Now, church, I have to tell you, I don't know where we are today. I know that this world is an evil world. Man, I don't make any doubt about that. There are people like Amnon in this world that are just mean people that plot to do evil, and as a result of that, there are innocent people that are hurt. I get that. But I have to tell you that from the church's perspective, we have to decide where we will be. Will we be the people like King David that watch someone get hurt? Someone like Tamar who lived the rest of her life in disgrace. Will we just sit and watch that and do absolutely nothing the way that King David did? Or are we the people, because we have to be strong Southern people, that the way to do anything is to get revenge, that we have to inflict the same amount of harm and even more on somebody because of the evil that they've done? Is that what we want to do? Is that the way we as God's people want to live? Where we let that anger, that bitterness, and that hatred build up in our heart to such a point that it leads us to do things or to say things that we never thought that we would do? Or maybe there's just a little bit of Jim Shaughnessy in us. That because we have given our lives to Christ, that we are willing to take 100% responsibility for the 3% of whatever it may be. That we are willing to go to someone and help them to realize that there is something greater about us. Not because of who we are, but because of whose we are. Not because of what we do, but because of the mission that He has given us. We have been forgiven much, and so we have a message to share with other people. Is it possible that there are people around us, that in our circle, that need to experience the love of Jesus Christ in a way that they've never seen it before, and that we might have, with tears in our eyes, with our heads bowed low, that, Father, I pray that would know You as God, the Father, the same way I know You. Father, may know Your Son Jesus as Lord and Savior the same way that I do. Now, a lot of you have lived a little bit too long, and you've grown a little bit too bitter. And you don't think that anybody's willing to change. They may not. But I can't help but think that there are a couple of old crusty people, just like Jim's father, that would change. Here's my thing. I'd at least like to give them the opportunity. I would at least like to give them the opportunity. The song of encouragement that we sing every Sunday is because we believe that there are people that are still willing to change, to come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior, to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. The reason we sing this song every Sunday is because we still believe that while the world wants to fill us with hatred, with a desire for revenge, the desire to do more harm to others than they have done to us, we want to believe that there are still people that want to be filled with the love of Jesus and to make things right. Perhaps there's a situation in your life that you'd like to carry before the Father today. Whether it's a need for prayer or desire to become a Christian, we'd like to help you in any way we can. Won't you come as we stand and as we sing?